All right, everyone. Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started here. It's 1:30. I am Kevin Krause, and I am thrilled to be here with you today. Just looking out and seeing people in the audience gives me some hope. It's not always easy to have hope in today's world, but you're bringing it to me today. So what I want to tell you before I even start is I'm going to have a whole lot of references in here. These slides are already posted to our website. Okay, so if you're trying to take notes or whatever, don't worry about that. Try and just absorb information. All the references that I talk about are listed on our website as well under Books and Resources tab. So that's my first starting thing. Okay, now I'm going to give you a warning. This is a huge, huge topic. I could probably talk to you about it for weeks. We've got an hour. So I'm going to do my best to scratch the surface and outfit you with some knowledge and some skills to hopefully build upon as you go ahead. Okay, 3 objectives today, 3 simple objectives. I want you to understand why soil is important. I want you to understand the difference between dirt and soil by the time we're done. They're not the same thing. And then I want you to understand a little bit how to make soil. All right? Anybody concerned about health, being healthy? Excellent. Can anybody finish this phrase for me? If you don't have your health, you don't have anything. Absolutely right. So important, isn't it? So by the end of this, you should understand that soil is absolutely vital to your health. Okay, I'm going to do this by way of telling you just a little bit about my story. My wife and I have gone through this. My wife, Mikki, right over here. And I'm going to be very brief with this, but I grew up as an Iowa farm kid. Got exposed to agriculture early on. Went off to Colorado to the Air Force Academy and had a military career for about 26 years. Thank you. Thank you. All are kind. Had a phenomenal time around the world serving with phenomenal Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, maybe some in this tent today. I majored in electrical engineering, which gave me sort of a technical mindset, if you will. I used to think technology could solve everything. I don't quite see it that way anymore. A life-changing event for my wife and I was stationed at the Pentagon in 2008. This movie came out. So we went in Washington, D.C. to a limited release movie and saw Food Inc. The premise in the movie, if you heard Michael Pollan today, he opens it. He says our food has changed more in the past 50 years than in the previous 10,000. That kind of inspired my wife and I to do a little research. And then, of course, this fellow was in it. So we said, hey, we're 2 hours from this fellow. Let's go meet this guy, Joel Salatin. Let's see what he's about. So this really, frankly, made my wife and I obsessive, passionate researchers for the past 15 years. We began by researching what is the link between nutrition and human health. That's where we started. So these are just a few of the books. Then we started looking at, well, there is a link between nutrition and human health. So how do we grow food with nutrition in it? How can we do that? So we started researching that. How can we farm more like Joel? Then in 2015, we moved to Tennessee and we started this farm. It's a small version of Polyface farm. We raise beef, pork, chicken, turkey, eggs, ducks, honeybees, etc. Sell direct to the public is what we've been doing now, going on 9 years. So it's given us a great deal of experience. In our journey, we have read more books than we can remember, looked at more medical studies, seen more podcasts, all that sort of thing. I don't say that to impress any of you. In fact, every time I read a new good book, I feel dumb for what I didn't know. That happens every day. I'm humbled by what I don't know. But in our journey, this quote is one I happened upon that is phenomenal, I think, and I submit it to you. As you go about your journeys here today, tomorrow, next week, don't believe a darn thing I say. Be skeptical. Be skeptical, right? And as I say that to you, Edward Deming said it very well, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. As I reflect upon that in my last 50 years of life, there's so much I've been told that's fact without any data. The words safe and effective come to mind, and I hope I don't offend anybody here with that. But there's so much out there we've been told that when I dig into it and look for data, it's like, oh, that's an old wives' tale, evidently, because where'd that come from? But at the same time, on the other side of that coin, be open-minded. What we believe to be true today is vastly different than it was 15 years ago. So we've learned a lot, and approaching it with an open mind really gives you a chance to identify there are miracles all around us every day. We may not be able to explain half of them, But if we stop and observe, we're going to learn a lot from Mother Nature. Okay, as our blinders came off, we started to look around and say, what the heck is going on in the good old US of A? We have a chronic disease epidemic that's very, very sad. Diseases I never even heard of as a kid. These are diseases I didn't know anything about until very recently. So what the heck is going on? Why do we have an exponential increase in all these diseases and more? Why, when I turn on TV, does some pharmaceutical company trying to peddle to me their latest purple pill? I need to go talk to my doctor because I got to have their new purple pill to solve my whatever, right toe disease. Where the heck did that come from? Why do we have that? It's eye-opening. But then we started to do some hard looks at it, and oh my gosh, the United States of America is sick. I'll propose that to you. We could talk statistics for months. These are just a very few that really struck a chord with my wife and I. The top one was done by the Pentagon, a study in 2017, where 3 out of 4 military-age youth in this country could not join the military even if they wanted to. The greatest reason, poor physical health, chronic disease. That's the number one reason. That ties right into the next statistic. About the time I was born, 4% of our entire population had a chronic disease. Today, almost half of our kids have a chronic disease. Mississippi was the only state with obesity above 30% in 2006. Today, 41 states have achieved that award, if you will. Put a dollar figure on it. In World War II, the United States spent $4.1 trillion in all of World War II in today's dollars. We spent $4.5 trillion on healthcare last year alone. I would submit totally unsustainable. How much is a trillion? If I offered to give any one of you $1 million a day on your homestead, wouldn't that be exciting? You get $1 million a day, you could run around here and put all these vendors out of work today. You could do that, $1 million a day, for 2,740 years before you spent $1 trillion. But in today's world, we throw it around like it's chump change, if you watch the news, right? Oh, we're only over by 1.5 trillion this year. Oh, that's all, no problem. So what's going on here? We're oversimplifying a big problem. But for one thing, we've got stuff in our food that should not be there. We've got residue from glyphosate, Roundup, glufosinate. We've got heavy metals. We've got all kinds of things. You want to learn more about that? Dr. Michelle Perro did a phenomenal work. She's been treating kids for decades. What does she usually do to make some sick kids healthy? Get them off genetically modified food with Roundup residue. That's one of her starting points, always. Works well. Zen Honeycutt, great lady. She's a mom out in California, lives in North Carolina now, but she had children who had health problems. So she was inspired to do some tremendous research on why in the heck is Johnny sick. That led her down the path of what is in our food, what's in our vaccines. Frankly, she's done some great research on that. So she's got a phenomenal book. She started an organization called Moms Across America. She teamed up with Moms Across America, and they went out to restaurants and picked up food off the shelf, the kind of stuff you and I are used to eating all the time. They sent it to laboratories to see what was in it. They looked at about 27 different pesticides. Think there's any in there? Absolutely. That, heavy metals, there's a whole potpourri of things. Very briefly, this stuff is usually identified in parts per billion. So when you talk about parts per billion, people can think, oh, that's not a very big number. As the men out here in the audience have an average testosterone level in their blood between 3 and 10 parts per billion. Are you with me? 3 to 10 parts per billion. Just keep that in mind as a reference. When they did this test on moms in Canada, they weren't farm workers, they're just eating the food. They found blood parts per billion averaging between 30 and 120 parts per billion of glyphosate, glufosinate, some of the other herbicide chemicals we use in our fields. Now, that's not a scientific study that concludes anything, but I just want you to understand the relative scales. If people try to say, oh, don't worry about there's that much residue in your food, it only takes 3 to 10 parts per billion to sort of do, make me a man, if you will. Okay, the other piece of this puzzle is we got stuff in our food first that shouldn't be there. Now we don't have stuff in our food that should be there. What does it take to create a healthy human being? Dr. Weston Price sought to answer this question in the 1930s. He traveled the world. He found 24 pockets of isolated peoples And very cooperatively, they allowed him to inspect them very, very much. He was a dentist, so he looked at their teeth first and foremost. He found people with virtually no cavities, no chronic disease. They didn't have cancer, diabetes, autism, obesity, none of that. And oh, by the way, he said they didn't even have any jails or asylums. You know, kind of insinuating their mental health was good. They didn't need to lock up any of their people because they all, you know, mental health was good. This is the single best book I've ever read on health and nutrition, if you're a reader. It's 500 pages. Phenomenal book. What do they all have in common? Nutrient-dense foods. That's what they all ate, nutrient-dense foods. What does that mean? Foods loaded with vitamins, minerals, enzymes, etc. What he also documented is as soon as modernized foods showed up into these isolated pockets of people, they immediately got tooth decay and disease followed. The teeth became his window into their overall health. If the people had bad teeth, they've got nutrient deficiencies. In fact, when he got back and figured all this out, he would treat people's cavities with nutrition. Things like cod liver oil and grass-fed butter. Cavities would go away. Pretty phenomenal research that he did. So what does that say? That says the absence of nutrition can cause disease. The presence of a toxin can cause disease, but the absence of nutrition can. Now, what data do I have for that? Well, here's one from our farm. We were raising up some baby chicks one year, and about the 2 weeks of age, they started to die. One of the symptoms was they had curled toes. I remembered reading one of Joel's books where he said he faced that, and it was a vitamin B deficiency. So I ran out and got some vitamins, put it in their water. Instantly, they stopped dying. Now, this is a picture of one of the mama hens who made it. She still got the curled toe, though, but it turned out to be a deficiency that made her sick, not, you know, some cause, if you will. It was an absence of something. Now, do humans have the same thing? Of course. You probably remember scurvy, lack of vitamin C, rickets, lack of vitamin D, etc. What else is being caused in our chronic disease epidemic because of a lack of something? It's not usually something we research, is it? They're usually too busy researching the next purple pill to plug the hole. You want a more modern opinion? Dr. Mark Hyman has some phenomenal work. He's been a functional medicine doctor for decades, treating people with food. He'll tell you over 80% of the chronic disease is treatable with food. Nutrient-dense food. Like Michael Pollan, he sums it up and says if people who lived 200 years ago wouldn't recognize it as food, don't eat it. Pop-Tarts aren't on the list. Now, conceptually, if you think about it perhaps in this way, let's rate your health between a 1 and a 10. A 1, you're burdened with chronic disease, probably a lot of pharmaceuticals. 10, you're almost perfect health. What drives you to a 10? Nutrition. That nutrition is like a savings account. Consider it like that. If you build up enough nutritional content in your body, you can take a lot of hits from the toxins. Every time you take a hit from a toxin, you're being pulled to the left. So if you start to think about it in this way, what am I putting in my mouth at lunchtime? Does it have nutritional value? Is it pulling me to the right? Or is this ice cream pulling me to the left? Now I know I got to eat something better tonight to make up for it. You know, it's kind of a seesaw, teeter-totter thing, but conceptually that helps me to think about it. So we don't even know as humans all that nutrition involves, I would submit. But here is a data point I will submit to you. This is the chemistry periodic table. If you've had chemistry, you may remember there's a whole lot of elements on here. The first 90 are produced by Mother Nature. If you didn't know this, in World War II, doctors had a hard time getting enough blood to treat casualties out in the Pacific. They were very successful at filtering seawater and using that for transfusions. So what does all that indicate, and a whole lot more research, is the blood plasma flowing through our veins is a dilution of seawater. All the minerals that are in seawater, all 90 of those, are in all the right ratios to feed your body. Same for your cat, your dog, your chicken, your honeybee, your plants. Now, I doubt that's a coincidence, but I sure can't explain that one. How are we all tied back to blood plasma, sap plasma, being a dilution of seawater? But that's just an indicator to me that nutrient density involves 90 minerals. not just 3 of them, 90. That's why I start putting Redmond salt in my drinking water. May help. Okay, so that begs the question, what's nutrient dense about this stuff? Now, my wife and I went to the grocery store one day, took some pictures, and it's not engineered for nutrition in any way. It's how can we use the cheapest possible ingredients, give it the longest lasting shelf life, and sell it over and over and over. Don't care about the consequences, don't care about the $4.5 trillion bill that comes with it, because that's somebody else's problem. Well, unfortunately, it's all of our problem. And we're living with it today. So none of that is nutrition, high fructose corn syrup, soybean oil, corn oil. That's the foundation of it all, because that's a cheap ingredient. One of the saddest examples of this, my wife and I went to pull some infant formula off the shelf. Here's 4 different infant formulas. What's the number 1 ingredient in all 4 of them? Corn syrup. Gee, this takes a lot of scientific wisdom, doesn't it, to start to figure out what we're doing to our kids. Corn syrup in all 4 of these, number 1 ingredient. Number 2 is a soybean or a industrial seed oil, if you will. The Weston Price folks will tell people of any age shouldn't eat that stuff, but we feed it to our infants. Very sad story. How does this happen? I can't explain that either. Here's another fellow I think very highly of, Dr. Arden Anderson. You heard reference to this morning with Michael Pollan. So processed foods, ultra-processed foods, it's kind of easy to understand. The nutrients have been processed out. What about the apples and the carrots? Well, there's good research that says if I could find an apple from 1941, it'd have a whole lot more nutrition in it than one does in 2024. Why is that? We're going to talk about that. So what I tell you there is all apples are not equal. All oranges are not equal. All carrots, you name it, are not created equal. All eggs are not created equal. So how do we begin to tell as a consumer? Well, the first thing God gave you was taste. Taste. If your food has no taste, if that tomato you just bought at Kroger, you can't tell the difference between the box it came in or the tomato itself, rest assured there's no nutrient density in it. Okay? So that's a real good start. Does it have flavor? Does it not? That's hard too, because we've all lost track of what flavor is. We're used to hard tomatoes. That's a tomato to most kids, especially young kids who didn't know any different. But you can add a little science to this and get a $20 Brix meter, a refractometer. You can order it off Amazon. I enjoy doing this now when I have time, but my wife brings home, the best produce, we can try and find. Organic, sometimes non-organic. I'll taste it. And then I'll put some sap on my Brix meter. And all I need to do is take a garlic press and squeeze a little juice on there, look up in the light. And when you look up in the light, you're going to see a little circle with a scale in it like this. Where that blue line crosses, in this case, if you guys can see that, that's a 10. So it's a Brix of 10. Okay, that doesn't mean anything necessarily to you yet. But essentially, the higher the number, well, these are a couple things you can use to squeeze sap out. Garlic press. The same thing I'm going to tell you applies to my cattle. I want my cattle to eat nutrient-dense forage. So I test the Brix of my forage with the Vice Grip sap extractors on the bottom. Dr. Kerry Reams did some tremendous research on this in the early mid-1900s. And if you go out to highbrixgardens.com, he's given you a reference point for what Brix readings are: poor, good, excellent, average, for a variety of produce. So how does this help you? Up to your imagination, but let's say you go to Kroger and you got 2 different types of carrots, you're not sure which one to buy. Over time, buy both and do a Brix reading on them. You can directly compare numerically which one has more nutrient density within it. That helps. You can start to calibrate your taste buds over time. Start to learn what a Brix 12 tomato tastes like. And then you're your own meter. That's the meter my cattle have. Every time I put them on new pasture, they go to the high Brix plants because they're smart enough to know this already without our help. Okay, fast forward to 2016. Us humans started learning about this stuff called the human microbiome. As I stand here, as you sit here today, we have 10 times as many microscopic critters living in us and on us as we have human cells. I don't know how new that is to anybody, but 2016, it's not that long ago that this really started to come out. So we are walking microbes. We are walking compost piles. What do those microbes do? They digest our food, just like the compost pile in the backyard. They create vitamins and enzymes my body cannot produce on its own. They feed it to me. Those microbes are my caretaker. They live physically on me and in me. They make up 80% of my immune system. Tremendous research in the book on the left will tell you they are vital to proper brain function. You ever watch the news and wonder, what the hell was that guy thinking? If we, in a perfect world, we could analyze his microbiome, we'd probably find it was a mess. A litany of things contribute to that, but that's certainly a factor. The middle one, Dr. Sabine Hazen. I've gotten to know Dr. Hazen a little bit. She's got a company out in California called Progenobiome. She testified over COVID to Congress, and in her treating of COVID patients, she found that the ones who took it the worst were missing a particular bacteria in their digestive tract, bifidobacteria. What did her research indicate? What killed bifidobacteria? The vaccine was one thing. What else? What helped it? Ivermectin actually helped promote bifidobacteria. So she was testifying on Senator Johnson's behalf for this. What she's also doing is she is taking fecal matter from us humans, running it through a machine that'll assess the genetic content. So she can compare the genetic content of, say, my fecal matter to any one of us in the audience, but she's doing it in a manner where she takes somebody with Parkinson's, somebody with Alzheimer's, somebody who's healthy, and comparing the microbes. There's a difference, and she's correlating. Oh, yeah, the guy with Parkinson's is missing this in his microbiome. So that's not cause and effect, but that should tell you there's some significant relationships going on here between the critters in us and how healthy we are walking around. Josh Axe sums it up very well. If you want to get healthy microbiome, eat some dirt. And you spend a lot of money on microbes, but just don't wash your carrots as well out of the garden. If you stop and think about that, little babies are born, right, with the tendency to put all that stuff in their mouth. Maybe that's a God-given talent to build up their microbiome until we put too much Purell on their hands and hurt that sort of thing. So we are walking microbe piles visually. And hopefully that makes you think, gee, what about this antibacterial body wash I use every day in the shower? I'm attacking myself. How many courses of antibiotics did the doctor give me last year? Oh, that's a problem. I got to reestablish those little dudes or I'm going to have problems. Start to think about it in those ways, perhaps. So if you've never seen this stuff, that's what it looks like under my microscope. That is a strand of fungi, a fungus. You guys don't look as excited as I am about fungus. I love fungus. But we think there's 500,000 species of fungi. We haven't begun to name them all. Bob, Susie, Phil, Pete, we don't know who they are. We don't necessarily what they do. But in our infinite wisdom, there are companies genetically modifying this stuff now so we can make it better. So be aware of that, please, when you're looking for things to put in your garden. This is what bacteria looks like, very small. There's some little rod-shaped things in here, some little circle things in here. Those are bacteria. We think there's 1 million species of these guys and gals. We don't begin to know what they do. But antibiotics will do a number on them. So will glyphosate herbicide, the active ingredient in Roundup. It guts the fungi populations. It guts the bacteria. Okay, so if you're with me so far, there are at least 2 keys to human health. A healthy microbiome and nutrient-dense food. There's more, but that's all the time we got to go into these things. So where the heck do they come from? Well, I've got with me in this test tube the most important livestock I have on my farm. Assessed with my microscope, this is loaded with fungi, bacteria, protozoa, and nematodes. This stuff comes from the soil. That's where the microbiome comes from that lives in us and on us. This is the magic that puts nutrient density in the food chain. At the bottom of the chain, where God, Mother Nature, intended it to happen. So, soil. How do I know this? Well, there's a whole lot of research. I'm trying to do my own, but I'm an amateur. I studied through Dr. Elaine Ingham. She's been studying this stuff for decades. She's an internationally renowned expert on the microbiome, what the microbiome does, what all these critters are, et cetera. So I went through her training program at the Soil Food Web School, took her advanced program, became a soil consultant, lab technician, and have a microscope. And also I love these little guys and gals. They're critical to our life. We can't live without them. I went on and trained with Korean Natural Farming, Mr. Chris Trump, if any of you have heard of him. I can't recommend Korean Natural Farming enough as well. Phenomenal program. If we take off our American hats for a minute and realize there are more people in the world than us, Koreans and Japanese have been documenting their farming skills for 2,000 years, long before we ever developed glyphosate. So 2,000 years. And what did they find? The most important ingredient in your soil is the biology. They figured this out without a microscope 2,000 years ago. And they also figured out the dilution of seawater matches the plasma of your blood. Trained through Geoff Lawton's program to become a permaculture design guy, yada, yada. But anyway, just telling you where I sort of got these ideas in case you guys want to go out and do some of this yourself. So dirt versus soil. Dirt is the dead stuff. Sand, silt, clay. Critical. That's where the minerals come from in our soil. It's not soil, though, until you add what's in my test tube. This is life. The handful on the bottom right is life. There's more critters in that one handful than there are people on planet Earth. You just can't see them, so we don't respect them. But in our infinite ignorance, we've made sure that dirt is taking over. God gave us trillions of microscopic critters as farm hands to work for free, 24/7, 365. What did we treat them with? Excessive tillage, chemical fertilizers, and pesticides. Insecticide, fungicide, herbicide. So all of those kill these little guys and gals. Causes a problem. Causes dirt. And we're great at doing it. Now, I don't like to pick on my farmers. I love my farmers. I am one. I want you to also realize that part of the problem's in the good old suburbs, the good old cities. Lawns make up about 40 million acres across the country. The most heavily used per acre of chemicals is in the lawns. We're obsessed with our dandelions and things like that. In fact, dandelions are healthy. You can eat those, but we try and kill them with chemicals. Where's the chemicals go? They're killing the life in your yard. They're running into the creek. They're in your fish. They're in your water. You know, we need to figure this stuff out and try and do better is my submission to you. What are symptoms of dirt? Erosion. You look at that top right picture, that's dirt. Life and humus hold it together in a rain. There's nothing holding that together. That's washing away. Poor yields. Insects. If you come to the class tomorrow, we'll talk more about that, but healthy plants do not attract insects. So if you've got an insect infestation in your garden, it's not a lack of sevin dust. It is the fact that your soil is not healthy enough to have a nutrient-dense plant. Here's one I like to foot stomp. Everybody in elementary school may have heard about the Dust Bowl days of the 1930s. We're so much smarter, though, aren't we, than we were back then? We got these iPhones. We're all wizards. We're all smart. Well, I saw this article last year where there was a 72-vehicle pileup on I-55. I read the article. The article was written in a manner to talk about this freak dust storm that came through. Was it freak? No. Had we gone up there, we'd have seen the agricultural fields next to the interstate tilled to oblivion, this dirt, and high wind comes, what happens? The Dust Bowl, 2.0 or 3.0 at this point. So that was a man-induced catastrophe, I would submit. Okay, so we talked about our microbiome. Trillions of critters all over us. And oh, by the way, your cats, your dogs, your earthworms have a microbiome too. You know, God, Mother Nature's not reinventing the wheel. It works for every creature on planet Earth. They have a microbiome that's a caretaker. Oh, by the way, plants have the same thing. Plants have caretakers in the form of microbes. What do? They physically live on and inside the plant surface. They break down old nutrients, right? If there's dead plant matter that falls on the ground, if you have a dead chicken that falls on the ground, the microbes come out and recycle that, make a nutritional product that they can feed into the plant. They harvest minerals from sand, silt, clay. Enzymes and fungi bacteria and fungi create enzymes to break down the sand, silt, clay, and pebbles, harvest the nutrition needed for the plant. So, in short, they inject nutrient density at the bottom of the food chain. I would submit you can no more make nutrient density in your food without these guys then you can make wine without yeast or pizza crust without yeast, you know? It kind of makes sense. We don't know how the yeast turn sugar into alcohol. We just leverage them, right? That's what goes on here. So in picture form, here's what you got. You got a plant. Photosynthesis comes down and gives that plant energy. That plant creates sugars. Those sugars get converted into the physical body of the plant, the physical body of the roots, energy. But that plant pumps about 40% of those sugars downward into the ground. Those sugars also feed all these critters right here. There is an intelligence here we may never fully understand, but those plants are capable of producing hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of simple sugar to pump into the ground to speak to different components in this test tube. They need calcium. They speak to whatever little dude in here gets them calcium. That little dude goes out and gets it, brings it back, gets a reward in the form of exudate from photosynthesis. It's a pretty fascinating thing, I think. You guys aren't looking too excited yet. This is a miracle. So we got microbes all over in the root zone. They only live in about the top 3 inches of the soil. That's where they're really concentrated. So it doesn't go very deep, top 3 inches. If you've come through the bulldozer and taken that all away, there goes all your helpers in that pile over there. Okay, and now, as Dr. Elaine will tell you, it's not just the microbes, they're critical, but it's an entire food web that actually makes all this work. There's layers upon layers of organisms, and every one has a purpose. Bacteria and fungi at the bottom, then you got nematodes that eat these things, etc., all the way up to songbirds. Songbirds have a role in this. We won't have time to go into it, though. Okay, another fundamental thing to understand is succession. Nature is always trying to move bare ground into old-growth forest, or the equivalent. Could be old-growth cactus. So what happens? When there's exposed ground or exposed rock, like a new volcanic island pops up in the Pacific, Mother Nature sends in bacteria first. Those workers go to work on the magma. They break it down. They release nutrition that will feed the lichens and the moss. The lichens and moss, in turn, further break down that rock, pass the baton to the annual weeds, on and on and on. So it's a constant relay race with a baton marching along. We get most excited about in the middle because that's where we grow our gardens and our vineyards and our orchards. And at that point, you have a ratio of fungi to bacteria of about 1-to-1. Just planting some seeds here. You guys, I won't expect you to truly absorb all of this in great detail, but about a 1-to-1. So what we can determine is if we look on the far left, under the microscope, I'm going to see a whole bunch of bacteria, hardly any fungi. On the right, I'm going to see mostly all fungi, hardly any bacteria. In the middle, I want to see about a 1-to-1 ratio, and that's where I want to get the soil in my garden so it works well. Okay, if you guys, you'll be tempted perhaps in your homestead to go out and get a soil test from the Extension Service. I don't want to dissuade you from that. But what they're going to look at in that is the chemistry. They're not going to look at all at the biology. They're going to apply some acids to your soil sample. Based upon what's released by those acids, they're going to quantify how much calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, etc., is in that sample. Now, does that mean it's all available to the plant? Not if you killed off all these little dudes. These are the dudes that make sure the plant gets fed all that stuff. So this is a very limited, myopic view here of your soil. Not that it's not valuable. But you can start to identify, am I missing any mineral content? We'll talk more about that tomorrow. We just won't have time today. But what we're looking for is all of this. We want all of this life to be doing what it does. And when you look at it under a microscope, it literally looks like a jungle under there. You know, we got versions of lions right there eating antelope. All that's going on under your feet. My version of a soil test, as Dr. Elaine taught me, is I use a microscope. So I look at my soil, and I assess the bacterial and the fungal content, and I create a chart that looks like this. So I'm looking at how much bacteria is in here, how much fungi, how many nematodes, protozoa, etc. Now, I've done that to validate the theories I've been taught. My wife and I make some phenomenal compost on our farm. That's what's representative on the far left side of all three of these graphs. The top graph will show you the blue column is bacteria, the red column is fungi. See, there's a lot of that in there. And it's roughly 1-to-1. There's also protozoa down here in the left. In the bottom right, there's nematodes. Now, there are 3 other samples up here. The second sample over is some bed mix we went and bought from the nursery. We're making raised beds. We want some quick fix here. Let's go get some nursery bed mix, put it in our raised beds. It didn't work very well, so I pulled out the microscope, and oh, look at that. There's hardly any life in it. Whatever process they use, dehydrate it, whatever, it's not much life. Now, I went back home to my home state of Iowa, and I pulled some samples of soil out of a cornfield and a soybean field. That's where the bottom of our food chain starts, right? Corn, soybeans, feeds everything, right? All I found in it was bacteria. How nutrient dense is that corn and soy? You know, we cut the legs out of the microbes right at the start. So that's just another complicating factor I would submit. Then we spray it with Roundup and everything else, so that's what we're eating. Nutrient deficient in the field, genetically modified, sprayed with a herbicide. Yeah, give me some more of that. So you should be, I'm sure you're getting the point now that the way this works is sort of like a food pyramid, but my version has microbes at the bottom. They hold this whole thing up. They deliver nutrient density to nutrient-dense plants. In turn, we all feed off of that. Whether it's your cow, your goat, your chicken, or us. We become nutrient-dense if the plants are nutrient-dense. Okay, congratulations. This, to me, is the most important part of the presentation. You know why this matters. Because doing this isn't necessarily as easy as getting a jug of Roundup and 7 Dust to 3 tomato plants at Lowe's. All right? But you understand why it's important. Your health depends upon it. We got to get a little nutrient density going here somewhere. So what do I want you to do now? I want you to be a microbe farmer. Does that sound scary, complicated? Not really. They're just sort of like little dogs and cats. What do they need? Air, water, food, and comfort. No different than us. Any of you ever baked pizza crust? You've been a microbe farmer. You've pulled microbes out of an envelope. You've fed it food in the form of sugar, water. You put it in a temperate environment, and it rose, right? It activated. So that's what microbe farming is about. Now, we want to try and do that on a broad scale. So let's use some examples of what not to do if you're a microbe farmer. Let's say you have a piece of ground, and you till the tar out of it. What have you done? You ran an F5 tornado through the neighborhood. Not saying never till. There are times you have to, but understand what you're doing. You ran an F5 tornado through the neighborhood. Now, we took away all the solar collection, right? So there's no more sugars being pumped in the ground to feed any of this. How hot does that soil get now in the sun? Very hot. These guys love the same temperatures we do for the most part. All right? So if I've got 150 degrees and I wouldn't be happy there, they're not happy there. How's the water going to retain in that soil? It's not, right? So that's just an extreme example of what not to do. Now, if we didn't hammer it enough, what do we come back with usually? Oh, let's spray it for weeds. We've made these guys and gals an endangered species at the root. Now, here's another example, because you do not have to till your ground to cause a problem. Let's say you got a bunch of livestock. Daniel was talking about this morning. What if I let these livestock overgraze that pasture? What do you see? How well does that grass that's half-inch tall, how well does it hold water? Nope. How much sugar energy is being pumped into their roots? Not much, right? We killed off all the solar cells. Is it going to get hot in the sun? Heck yeah. The blanket of insulation is gone. So just by overgrazing, we can wreak havoc on these little guys and gals. And then, how nutrient dense is the beef in that animal? Will I have to use pharmaceuticals to keep it healthy? Probably, because it didn't get any of the enzymes or vitamins it was supposed to get from the plants, because we killed off the workers. So instead of, what mainstream is doing, here's a great book. Gabe Brown, Regenerative Agriculture. That is a term I will use. Look into it if you haven't already. Regenerative agriculture farms with these guys in mind first and foremost. We need to be microbe farmers. And there's some basic principles of doing that apply whether it's your yard, your garden, your field, whatever. So let's say you think or assume that you've probably killed off your microbiome. You don't have it. Where can you get microbiome? Well, there's pros and cons to each of these different methods, but livestock manure has microbiome. That's why animals can be very, very helpful. But their microbiome is really only good as their nutrients. So maybe you help by feeding your animals probiotics until you get things going again. Just ways to think through this a little bit. Earthworms have microbiome. So every time an earthworm goes through your soil, it leaves a trail of microbes behind it. Do you have any earthworms in your soil? Hopefully you do. If you don't, geez, can I get some earthworms back? How can I do that? And then vermicomposting. You can do this at home. My friends over here at Hiawassee Products have a beautiful vermicomposting system. Take a look at it if you want to. Let's see, thermophilic composting is another thing. Anyway, these are all methods that we don't have time to go into today, but gives you some idea. There's also commercial products, by the way. I don't want to leave those out. I don't want to poo-poo commercial products. There are some good ones. There are some not so good ones. So in pictures, here's a very simple worm tub that you could build at home. If you're in an urban environment and you want microbes, I suggest people build a little worm container. Get some red wigglers in there. Let them eat up your old food. And then the manure, if you will, they leave behind in my hand right there is loaded with microbiome. Now I've got a source. I've got a source of yeast, if you will, to make pizza crust. On a larger scale, I do this with a pitchfork, so I make thermophilic composting, Korean natural farming, other methods to get it. I use about 5 different methods at any one time. Here are some phenomenal books to walk you through some of these processes as well. Again, out there on our website. Okay, so now let's just walk you through some examples. We talked about a lot of theory. Okay, is he full of it or does this stuff really work? So I want to show you a few pictures that I submit, kind of show it really works. Well, let's start with this. This is not a fun example, but I came out of my house one morning and the power company had workers walking up my power line spraying herbicide. Oh, by the way, call your power company. Make sure you're on their organic farm list so that doesn't happen. Anyway, they didn't find me on the list, so they came charging up there. They were trying to kill one of the trees, which they never did. But they used a heavy glyphosate product called Rodeo. All these have sexy names. And they tried to spray that tree, and then there's a lot of overspray. Do you see what they did to my pasture there, all that dead brown stuff? But it turned out to be an experiment for me. What did they do? They dumped on a patented antimicrobial product, patented by Monsanto. Actually, you can look up the patent. Glyphosate is a patented antimicrobial, so it will kill fungi, bacteria, etc. So what do I expect to happen? We talked through this very briefly. Let's say my pasture was over here in the middle at about a 1-to-1. We dump a killer solution on, I'm going to get pushed to the left, perhaps. Let's see if that happened. 2 years later, what do I have? A field of buttercups right there. Now, there's a whole lot of experts who would probably tell me to get rid of buttercups, spray it with a herbicide. I just made buttercups by you spraying it with a herbicide because I killed off my microbiome and I shifted it back to the left, if you will. So I have buttercups. Fast forward 2 years, starting to recover. 3 years. Actually, this is the 4-year point. This is this year. So it took Mother Nature 4 years to recover that one-time use of herbicide to give me some grass back in that spot. I didn't do anything to it. I didn't bring out and spray biology on it or anything. I just let it go for an experiment. There are other ways to do the same thing. This is called overgrazing. It's what my neighbor does. I love my neighbor, but he doesn't manage his cattle at all. So he overgrazes, gets a bumper crop of buttercups. Okay, let's look at a garden example. All this stuff is scalable, but we started small. This is the commercial bed mix we bought. We put it in our garden beds. And our plants grew about 6 inches tall, and that was it. So then I had to have a hard talk with myself. Hey, you're supposed to be some kind of soil dude. What the hell is going on here? Your plants are crap. So I pulled out the microscope and looked at it, and oh, gee. We took a shortcut. Doesn't have any life in it. But it's an experiment opportunity. So over the next year, we said, well, let's put biology on it. My wife is pouring in that sprinkler can liquid biology onto it right there. Over the winter, we're going to keep roots in the ground all winter if we can. So we planted hairy vetch. Not your only option, but hairy vetch is phenomenal here in Tennessee. We planted it all winter. So it's collecting solar energy all winter, pumping sugars into the soil to feed those microbes that we dumped on. What it looked like in the spring, I turned it over with a pitchfork. So a little bit of tillage here. On the left, you'll see the fungal content. Went from 0 to hero with fungal content in the root zone right there, thanks to the plants being there all winter. And what do I have there? I've got a whole bunch of organic matter now in that hairy vetch that these guys are going to feast on. And they're going to turn it into nutrients for the plants we're going to plant. Did it work? We think so. We had a lot better results that second year. We got some great crops out of it. Now let's look at a pasture example, scaling up even bigger. So in a picture, what? I want nutrient-dense forage, right? So I have healthy cattle. So when I eat a hamburger, it's loaded with nutrition. It doesn't take me to the left, it takes me to the right. It's all interrelated. So what did I do? I brought out some of these principles. Cow manure. I added some cover plants to it. I got chicken manure. And this is my homemade tank of biology. We'll talk more about that tomorrow if you get a chance to come. But the slides are out there. If you don't, you can take a look at that too. But I liquefy this, if you will, and create a biological tank that I go spread on the pasture to re-inoculate my soil in places where it needs it. We do rotational grazing, as Daniel described to you this morning. That means I move my cattle once a day. They only get as much grass as they're going to eat for the day. It's important to keep them moving. You can see in this overhead drone view, I've got an electric wire in front of them, an electric wire behind them. So they're eating that grass of today. On the ground, what does that look like? Well, they're eating a bunch, and then they're trampling a bunch down. They're getting it at feeding level for microbes, all the residue, if you will. So I'm rolling that residue right back into my soil in the making. So it's a great tool. So now let's compare. What do you think of this pasture? Sad. But it's not mine. I'm excited about that. We had a neighbor several miles down the road who volunteered for this experiment but didn't know I was doing it. So I took some pictures. So last year I went on the 15th of April, and I said, I was just driving by, and I said, gee, I don't see any grass out there. Let me take a picture of that. 15th of April. The exact same day in my worst pasture, my cows have this. Because what I've been trying to do. I have grass. I have orchard grass. I have a lot of goodness in there. I'm not saying this is the world's best, but I got a lot. Fast forward to the end of May. That's my neighbor's pasture. Do you see much difference? He's got some buttercup residue out there, but the cows still have nothing to eat. How well does that hold water in a drought? It doesn't. We had a drought that year. Fast forward, the exact same day at our place, I'm feeding them overgrown grass. They loved it, though. The red clover's in its prime. Some of the fescue's a little old, but they loved it. Now, fast forward to August, same pasture in August at my neighbor's. Gosh, it didn't change much all summer, did it? This, on the exact same day, I'm getting ready to graze this for the third time. I grazed it to the ground in April. I grazed it to the ground in June. Now it's August. It's Johnson grass. That's candy for my cows. They love it. Some may argue, oh, I don't like Johnson grass, but I love it. So you sort of get the idea. If you manage your cattle, you add biology, you add cover plants, you kind of do some of these principles, photo documentation that it'll work for you. Other things I start to look at. One of the challenges is actually observing and seeing this stuff. I love this. What's that? Fungi in my pasture growing up through the cow patties. Because before I started any of this, I did microscopic analysis of my soil. It was high bacteria, low fungi. So anytime I see this now, makes me smile. Hopefully you guys too. Now, was this a fluke? I went ahead to the following year in April and took a picture of my neighbor's pasture. You might drive by and think, oh, that's pretty pasture. Not if you're a cow, because there ain't much to eat. And that's where we're getting ready to graze on the exact same day. So I didn't carry it any further than that. It would have been the same this year. Now, large scale. Can this be done on a large scale? I'm not a row crop farmer, but I've met some phenomenal folks who are. Gabe Brown's doing this. If you haven't seen the movie Common Ground, a great new movie that features Gabe Brown in it. Rick Clark is doing this. Got a chance to meet Rick. He's doing phenomenal work on 7,000 acres of row crops. He gave up GMOs. He's not using genetically modified seeds anymore. He's not using Roundup anymore. In the process, he has saved $2 million on input costs per year. As a farmer, that's pretty damn good pay raise, I would say. So great fella doing great pioneering work. York Family Farms, there's a great, if you get out to the Soil Food Web, you can look up about a 4-minute segment on what they did at York Family Farms. Phenomenal. A peer, if you will, but he's been doing this for 30 years, so he's way ahead of me. Todd Harrington is a Soil Food Web consultant. He got together with a couple young farmers in Illinois and did the same thing with them, transitioned them off genetically modified crops. They gave up their herbicides, and they're doing great work. They're actually creating biologicals and selling it to local people. Okay, we're going to wind this down. I want you to think for a second, if you haven't. If you are getting ready to, if you raise food right now, if you're thinking about doing it, if you're getting ready to do it, I want you to reflect just very briefly on the fact that you would enter the ranks of unsung heroes. How many go out and thank your farmer every day? Who thinks to do that? I was very fortunate as a military guy at the right time. People thank me all the time, and I felt very honored by it. As a farmer, you're not going to get that. A rancher, probably. But realize that you are part of something vastly bigger than yourself. Vastly bigger than yourself. Can you think of any task more noble than raising quality food for Americans? Whoever, put it whatever nationality you want on it. But you literally have the power in your hands to give them a nutrient-dense product or a nutrient-deficient product. I think that's part of the problem we have today is, unfortunately, with all this big stuff we got going on, there's a screen between us and the farmers. The farmers forget that somebody's actually going to eat this stuff that I raised because you're, just faceless customers and they're faceless farmers. And we don't appreciate that, gosh, this only works if we have nutrient-dense food. Otherwise, we got a big problem. So this perspective comes from my military background, so just take that for what it's worth. But, last year, I guess I was out moving the cattle, and it dawned upon me. Kevin, you've been privileged to serve with Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines all over the world. During your service, had the nation learned that there was an adversary somewhere in the world that had a weapon system aimed at the United States capable of increasing chronic disease in our kids to 40% and beyond? Wouldn't that be a terrible weapon system? If the bad guys, metaphorically, had a weapon system aimed at us to make 40% of our kids chronically diseased. What if they had the power to take and turn 1 out of 36 kids autistic, which is the current rate, and it's going up? Mathematically, it's potentially could go up to 1 to 2 if it keeps on its same rate of increase. What if they had the power to increase obesity rates of America to 42% and higher? What if this weapon system could give a guy like me 1 out of 2 chances of cancer in my lifetime? That's what the current rate is for men, 1 out of 2 chance in our lifetime. What if they could affect our military-age youth such that 3 out of 4 couldn't even join the military? Would that be some sort of problem? It'd be a formidable weapon system, wouldn't it? What if that weapon system would force America to spend more than the price of World War II every year and potentially bankrupt them in a very short term? I know my fellow warriors out there, we'd have gotten rid of this or died trying, given the opportunity. 10 years removed from that environment, what do I see? Oh, Such a weapon system does exist. We own it. We're using it on our own people, and we have been for decades. And it's not a military fight, so, geez, what do? It comes down to the average American citizen. This is where I get hope when I see people engaged in this, learning, studying, trying to understand this problem set. It's affecting you, it's affecting your kids, your grandkids even as a dream ahead. All the generations are impacted by this, and we got a big problem. It's come home to roost. So here was a fellow who understood this. It's not a new problem. President Roosevelt said this right after the Dust Bowl. We don't fix this problem, we got a big problem. Yeah, we do. Still here with us. So we need American citizens now more than ever. So I like to end with just a little enlistment ceremony. Now that you've all been trained in this and you understand this, hopefully a little better than you did before you came in the tent, you've completed boot camp. So all I would love to do, if you're willing, is raise your right hand and repeat after me. Be part of a movement to fix this dang problem. So if you're willing, please raise your right hand and just repeat after me. To the best of my ability, I vow to help promote, build soil instead of dirt. Fantastic, y'all. Thank you. Thank you for being part of the team. Now, as we go, just feel free to go anytime you guys need to. You've been sitting a while. If you want more info on it, our website, we've got a whole lot of info we put on there. Yes, sir. I'll get you with a quick question. Let me burn through this real quick, and then I'll give you that chance. Here's some other great organizations. If you want more education, the Weston Price Organization, Children's Health Defense, Moms Across America, several of them have booths out here. Go out there and talk to the people. If you absolutely need to spray to kill a weed, I got a friend, Howard Vlieger, out here who has an organic pesticide. Throw your Roundup away. If you want to learn how to build the microbes, we're actually going to do a class here. It's about an all-day class from about 8:30 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, but we're going to teach you hands-on how to grow and make the microbes. There's a QR code you can scan if you want to get a ticket to that. That's going to be at Rory's right here. We're going to do it here, so you know where it is. But if you want to be a part of that, that's going to be in July, and we're going to do it again in August. Okay, that is everything. Sir, you had a question. The question was the biology that we make, how often do we apply it? Well, as a farmer, you can't always get a good schedule for starters, so I do the best I can. But I really like to do it in the fall, so it works over the winter. I really like to do it in the evening, and preferably right before rain comes. So if you can kind of plan all that out, and the forecast actually comes true, you've dumped it on, rain comes, in the fall is a great time, spring as well. This is just called a liquid extract, is what I make. So all it is agitating biology in water. I'll actually, if you got a chance tomorrow, I'll actually show it to you. I'll have a demo with a couple buckets, and we'll show you the simplest way to do that. All right, any other quick questions, y'all? We wore them out. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the QR code again, I'll leave up, guys. But thank you all so much. I appreciate your patience hanging in there today.